Welcome to the Taking Care of Tutu podcast. I'm your host, Meg Obanoff. We're so happy this week to have Scott Fisher on the podcast. In his day job, he works for Hawaii Island Land Trust, which is, maybe we'll have him talk a little about that. But the reason we invited you to come on, and we're hoping you'll talk about your experience as a vet, and also the oral history project that you did about vets on Maui. So anyway, welcome. We're super happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you, May. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, great. Well, we wanted to just stick instead of just doing 1 week of veterans issues and content, we wanted to try and talk about different aspects of support for veterans history, veteran benefits that are available all through the month of November.
Good. Excellent.
Will you give us a little backstory on yourself? I know.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's see. Actual veteran yourself.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Okay. So, born and raised on Maui. I should say almost born. My mom had complications in the pregnancy, so I was about a week old when I came to Maui. But obviously my family was living on Maui.
So born in Honolulu.
Yeah, born in Honolulu.
Weeks forward, go
exactly. Got it. So, but grew up in Kula. Have lived most of my life in Kula. I went to high school on Hawaii Island, on the Big Island, and so. But other than that, been on Maui. Other than when I was doing my education, and of course while I was in the Marine Corps, lived my entire life. Basically, now I live about 50 yards away from where I grew up, which is really nice.
Awesome.
But
did you go to the Marine Corps right after high school, or did you?
Yeah. So I was 17 when I enlisted. I know. It's funny because at the time I thought, no problem. But
now that we have children that age, we're like, oh my gosh.
My son was 17, around the same age. I was just like, wow, that was. I can see why my parents had to sign off. I couldn't enlist on my own, but so they had to sign off, which they did reluctantly.
Have you seen there's a whole ad campaign right now I see it on Hulu where it's kids who are that age talking their parents into the idea of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that.
It's really well done. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, no, I'll have to check that out. Yeah. So at 17, of course, the Marine Corps, you have two options for basic training or boot camp. Set at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, or Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island. And basically the divide is if you live west of the Mississippi, you go to San Diego. Yeah. So that's where I ended up. And so boot camp, 13 weeks long, very challenging on many, many different levels. Fortunately, I was in very good shape. So the physical side was not nearly as challenging as maybe it would be today. And so they created what they call task forces. And so they the Hawaii task force was Task Force Taro, which I thought was kind of cool.
You guys were together?
We were they were a little bit to the west of us. But yeah, Task Force Taro, I was like, oh, I wish I could be. That was the anyway, I can't remember which unit it was. It was the what they call brigade. But I was with again 1st Battalion 5th Marines, and we were paired with the 7th Marine Regiment, 1st Battalion 7th Marine Regiment, and we were Task Force Ripper. So we were involved in the invasion of Kuwait on our assault began on the 24th of February. And so,
1991.
1991. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. So basically August until November was the buildup. August, it kind of went 3 phases. August to November was basically setting up defensive lines. And so we would frequently dig in various areas in case the Iraqis tried to move through Kuwait into Saudi Arabia, which they did once the Gulf War started. Then right around November, we shifted into more of an assault posture and an offensive posture, and so we basically started training on how to, clear minefields and overcome, enemy armor and things like that, capturing prisoners. How do we deal with prisoners and things like that? So that was November until basically February. And February 24th, as I mentioned, we launched our assault. So my unit, Task Force Ripper, had, we had our objectives. Our objectives were the Al Wafra oil fields, the Al Jubail airport, which is where the Iraqi artillery was located. And then, of course, Kuwait International Airport, we set up kind of a defensive area. Once we had taken Kuwait City, we set up a defensive area around Kuwait International, but kind of between Kuwait International Airport and the Kuwait City. So it was fast, very brutal, and a lot of prisoners. So I at one point I kind of looked up how many prisoners did Task Force Ripper capture, because we a lot, and I think it was somewhere around 3,000 or 4,000 prisoners that we were able to capture. Most of them did not have any fight. We just so thoroughly overwhelmed them with force. I mean, casualties were high. I don't know the actual number. I've heard, I heard some discussion about the casualties, and it's just hard to say. But we did inflict a lot of casualties, and we captured a lot of prisoners. But ultimately, I think we arrived in Kuwait City. It was a leap year. I think we arrived there on February 29th. I kind of lost track of time during that experience.
And so everyone was talking about like Hawaii specific things that were mailed to them and how meaningful that was.
That's just it. I mean, there were like, there's kakimochi, and there, obviously things that had to last a long time. And it was just, like the basic necessities, because we didn't have any stores, and people would run out. And, I should have known, because my dad and my mom asked me, like, what did people need? And I was just kind of like throwing out some things, and like, there they came. So it was really, really powerful. But yeah, so as I mentioned, you're back to school. And then when I was in graduate school, I was kind of looking for summer opportunities, summer jobs. And I was only on Maui for a couple weeks, and so I approached the what is now the Haleho Ike Ike at the Bailey House, the Maui Historical Society. And so I approached them and said, just kind of came up with this idea, in some sense, thinking about how I can give back to my community. And what I proposed was talking to people, veterans and civilians, who lived on Maui during World War II. And I want to make it as ethnically diverse. Of course, Hawaii, Maui, very ethnically diverse. And I wanted to see what everybody's perspective on the experience of World War II was. How did, and it wasn't a sociological study. It was just give me your story. Tell me your oral history story. And that was incredibly enlightening on how
and
hard.
So great that you captured all of that, because I'm guessing most of your interviewees are not alive any longer. So
I know. I think the last one passed away 3 or 4 years ago, which was really, really sad. I mean, it's exactly right. And that was part of the selling point of this project was, look, we have a window of time where there are enough healthy people who we can actually talk to. And it just, again, it gave me a much deeper sense of what our community was able to endure as kind of a prolonged crisis. I mean, we of course, now we're all reflecting on the wildfires on Maui and Kula and Lahaina. And that was a very intense, horrific event. But the Second World War, from literally the 7th of December until, in reality, May of 1945, but really that intense period, most people in the interview focused on the time period from the 7th of December and just how much of a shock that came.
Right.
Until early June 1942. And of course, being a history buff, I kind of knew what I was aware of the historical timeline of the Second World War, particularly on Maui. And what really struck me was that 7th of June was when the Battle of Midway ended. And so with the Battle of Midway, Hawaii was no longer under direct threat of invasion. The immediate threat of invasion had largely gone away when the 5 aircraft carriers were sunk off of Midway. So incredibly powerful experience doing that. My experience with the VA has been unbelievably positive.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I tell you, I mean, I have what's called percussive tinnitus, which is combat, right? Not combat related.
It's obvious, like from infantry, that must be a lot.
Having a wire guided missile detonating right next to your ear can possibly do that.
Great.
Fired, yeah, exactly. So but you know, having gone into the VA for that experience, for that, you know, for the medical diagnosis and the treatment. Unbelievable. Just such a committed group of individuals. And I mean, that's my experience.
That's great. Awesome.